of electricity does when you look at Occupy Oakland, okay? I mean, Oakland didn't just jump up, right, onto the radar screen. I mean, there's a historic resistance and commitment to equity and social justice, and it's paid the price for that. The same was true of this crackling electric moment that yielded the Panthers out of Oakland, the Black Panthers, okay? So now you got SC, I mean, you've got the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, you've got SNCC, you've got sit-ins, you've got Black Power, you've got a dynamic, what King is trying to say, but civil rights, getting, jailed is not, that's not, you have to have the right credo before you go to jail, but there they are in Mississippi. And when Stokely says, what do you want? And King hopes they'll say civil rights. They say Black Power. And King goes like, I'm a leader. I gotta catch up with my people. That was his phrase. I gotta catch up with a change is gonna come. It will come. You have to change because the dynamic socially, juridically, politically, is always shifty ground. It's always changing, seismically sometimes by very imperceptible quivers. But in a word, King never an advocate of violence, but the 3-point program to deal with anti-imperialism, social justice, and equity of human beings, money, resources, is commensurate with free breakfast programs, medical care, the empowerment of the Black community, with the doctrines, with the policy, with the rhetoric, with the feeling, the affect of the Black Power movement. I say, and you know this, the King never, ever had the luxury of living outside the whirlwind of violence occasioned by money and race and imperial aspirations in this country. He never had the luxury of living outside that. He lived in the whirlwind of violence. When you think of that, you think of Marcus Garvey, right? Meet me in the whirlwind, okay? Because this country, this USA, this America, is pointedly against the interests of the Black and poor. Always has been, and that is not changing. That is not changing. You can show me a parade of Negro celebrities and give me all the Oprahs you want and the Obamas you want and so forth, right? And if I sit before that shadow show, puppet show, okay, magic lantern, okay, ridiculousness, ridiculousness because of the way you would take it away, okay? The intentionality is everything there. We want to show you how well you're doing, Houston. Boy, you guys are in clover. Look at you, You got presidents, you got movie stars, you got owners of teams, you got CEOs, right? And every time I see that kind of thing going on, I think about Strom Thurmond, at the March on Washington. Because we kept up with Strom down there in Louisville and, for the rest of our lives. And there he was on TV. He said, well, I tell the truth, I don't know what they're doing or what they want. They got more shoes, they got more refrigerators, they got more than any, money. And I'm like, that's imprinting. Obviously it is, it's stuck with me, So now, what more do you want? Seriously, you even got a movie of your own now. It costs $90 million, okay? $90 million is chump change for somebody who's running for president, like Mitt Romney, okay? I'm glad George Lucas did this. And wonderful praise, all praise, and to the actors and so forth. But, the fact that this is the first one ever, seriously? Okay? And then they're really happy. Lucas said, oh, well, I knew I'd have to get a black director. I thought, well, yeah, right? And it couldn't be Spike Lee. I thought, well, Spike probably wouldn't have taken the job. He don't need a job now. You know, he has his own production company and it's moving. Okay, so the deal for me at this point is a group of intellectuals, public intellectuals, who have displaced King. One of them has even written a biography of King, which is very problematic, and I can say more about that, were emergent out of their academic brilliance, and these are all incredibly brilliant men. They came out of academics. I mean, their credentials were they had PhDs and they had written books that the elite of the academy recognized as important for the disciplines that they represented. So they're smart. They're capable of intense investigation, excruciating precision of a scholarly cast, of using a research library, of tracking down archives and so forth. But once they got on television, they just went dumb, okay? Seriously, out of that model, okay, of what we want you to project is that you know everything about all black people and that you have a solution for us that will take only 15 minutes of an interview to put out there, right? So they began to do shorthand history, abbreviated sociology, rapid fire publication, right? And what you had was not so much analysis as concurrence and consensus with the regnant view of where black people were that was being sponsored by the likes of Rupert Murdoch and others. The mediatized view, right? So why not just step back? Well, it feels good to be the king, okay, of the media. It feels good to have resources to produce in what you have been credentialed in. And the problem is, the credential came for scholarly excellence, and when you produce a product that's slipshod, poorly researched, subject to all kinds of critique by people who are bright freshmen in college, right? And then you continue to grow because of the network that is the wealth knowledge, you know, putative knowledge complex, then egomania is fed, okay? And people begin to expect you to be the spokesperson, you know? And even when you know, as such person, that there's somebody right next door to you, may live condo next door, right? Smaller condo for sure, you know? But it's 3 times as smart. You're not gonna say, hey man, come on, Eugene, why don't you go over and you do this show? You know a lot more about this. No, no way. The media wouldn't have them, okay? And you become a brand, right? And once you are, and that's a loaded word, and then in our economy, it's once you're branded, okay? You gotta keep providing the product that is occasioned by the brand. So I think there are major problems that are endemic to our diasporic existence. I think those problems, as Dr. Kola has said earlier, have deepened and been exacerbated since this book was written. I think that we are, as we've often been, on a very foreboding precipice. And I think that we can't allow ourselves to be anything less than 24/7 vigilant, to look beyond the 24/7 news cycle, to look beyond the made by media supposed experts and black intellectuals out there. For God's sake, to join organizations like the Alban Research Library, to take the heritage tours, to go and talk to the children, to go and talk to the children, to go to whatever the socially aware church is that's near you, and listen to the people who are speaking without huge remuneration and who have 67 missions or services out of the church. Talk to people who have loved ones who are incarcerated. Sometimes a lot of family members are incarcerated. Get the real skinny of the society. And you will say that this precipice is one that's always been there, but it's extraordinarily dangerous now. And we'll talk more about that. I don't want to go any longer because I want to hear what you have to say, and I know that Dr. Kovett has some questions to ask. So I'm going to stop right here, okay? Where do you want me? Right here?
We're going to have to share a mic because we are broadcasting this live, and this is the mic that's mic'd. So I'm going to ask Houston, I already prepped him. I told him I only have 5 very small questions that I want to ask, and I said, so we had a conversation so that this could go well. You can tell that you need to read the book, and I'm so glad that he did not give you a play-by-play. I'm going to kind of give you some of the plays that are in the book so that you can understand my questions. One of the things that you talk about is Little Africa. I'm from Little Africa in South Carolina. Little Africa is not some place that you don't know. Almost everybody in this room, just looking around the room, is from Little Africa, whether or not you define it that way. It is Little Africa. And we're in fact right now standing on Little Africa, Atlanta. This is King's Little Africa. So now you're getting a sense of King was born in walking distance of where we are right now. And you're from Little Africa. And Little Africa changes people. It changes your relationship to the community. I know I grew up in Little Africa, and I was telling him about it, that whites and blacks had the same last name. My last name is Hopkins, and I was from Hopkins, South Carolina. There was a Hopkins General Store, and we didn't own it. His folks ran the general store in his Little Africa. There was Hopkins Elementary School. There was Hopkins High School. By the time I got to high school, though, I was one of the really, really lucky black people who got a chance to go to A.C. Flora High School in Columbia, South Carolina. I was one of the first blacks. So that means I got my butt beat every day in Little Africa. So now, Little Africa is everywhere.
Yes.
And so, I mean, it's everywhere. It hasn't changed. Some people think they don't live there anymore. I was at an event yesterday with C.T. Vivian, and we were talking about the fact that in Cobb County, there's Little Africa. You understand that you can't run from it as long as you're there. You think you might not be from there. I see somebody from Guilford Forest, the Little Africa that's up the street from where I live, where there's all kinds of things going on. Can you describe some of the things that we need to deal with coming from Little Africas, wherever we're from?
Yeah, I think that the universality would be the word here, not in any trivial or light sense, but the universality of the conditions of possibility that result in the birth of Little Africa are systemic. The greatest apartheid in the United States of America is housing, right? I mean, it's always been, and read Doug Massey's book on American apartheid and housing. I mean, the statistical follow-ups to that, Doug is at the University of Pennsylvania, or was the last time I was in touch with him, and we understand the extraordinary measures. I mean, just on the ground. They said in Detroit, right, that's another book by University of Pennsylvania professor, Detroit, The Origin of the Urban Crisis by Thomas Segue, S-E-G-U-E. In Detroit, when blacks were forced into a confined, I call them zones of containment, right? The white neighbors were mad at the developer, and they said, you know, how could you do this to us? We are gonna set up a house, a homeowners association. And those are all over the country, right? You know, and we won't even talk about what they did to themselves out in California with Proposition 13, you know. They didn't know when they said, we'll take away all the taxes, they're going to take away the libraries, the playgrounds, or something like that. White people can be interesting on some occasions. They hadn't quite researched it, you know. So in Detroit, the homeowners association, they said you can't do it because it's not a separation. You know, those people and built a 6-mile long wall, right? And so now you got a demarcation. Now we can be a homeowners association. So the things that have been done in the effort to keep from having any kind of odd mixture at all are these zones of confinement, or the ghetto, or the Bantustan in South Africa. We could go across the globe. Bangladesh, right? Mike Davis, a must-read book, paperback, Planet of Slums. Planet of Slums, okay? The poor have never lived well. And you make people poor, and then you keep them poor, and then you confine them, right? And the thing that's interesting, right? I mean, we know this. I can look around and see people in the room too. And that is, you can be single as a couple with children, the little Africa of your neighborhood. Does anybody get that? You know, I mean, like you can go like, hi, we're the Bakers. We live in, you know, Brighton Woods, Fox Chase Manor. And people go, I know they're not happy. No, they're not happy, right? You know, and you go down the street going like, hi, neighbor. Oh, I guess Charlie didn't see me. You know, Charlie is ticked, you know. Baby, I thought you told me when we, you know, bought into this neighborhood 2 years ago that, you know, honey, redlining is not, you know, I mean, it's not really going on at the same way that it used to. So the conditions of immiseration, of impoverishment, of disempowerment, of dispossession, and the marker of that is clearly, unequivocally, assuredly, skin color. You carry little Africa with you. Professor Gates found that out, didn't he? He found that out, you know, right? Then said, what am I going to do with the handcuffs, right? You know, went to the Smithsonian. Anybody on any given day can find that out double quick, okay? Malcolm knew this, right? What do they call a Negro PhD? You know the answer. You read the Bible, you know, nigger. Okay? So the idea that somehow this is escapable through simple dollars or your media appearance, Oprah, over there on the Champs-Elysees or somewhere, you know, hadn't even done her hair, you know. That's real, you know, chutzpah, you know, as people would say. Knocking on the window of that jewelry company, you know, store, trying to get a Rolex for probably a friend or something, right? You know, and they were like, there was a white couple in there shopping, and they just ignored her. And so she went back to the hotel, and her people called them up and said, do you know what you just did? Do you know who that was? They said, mm-hmm. But we had customers who'd have been very disturbed. Okay, all right? You can run, but you can't hide. Okay, little Africa is in you, and you have to decide what you can deny it. Okay, you can pretend, you can become some celebrity person and say that you are, and I hope that arises too. Have you met the post-black people? No. Okay. All right, we can talk about that a little later.
So that's how the book starts, is with a conversation of the fact of how did Houston Baker become a race man? And it was the little Africa experience that he documents and says that it doesn't go away. We can ignore it, we cannot talk about it, but what it should do is help us to be proactive in terms of recognizing the issues of our society and recognizing that we all sitting in this room and outside this room, we have a lot of work to do. I told Dr. Baker that one of the things that I needed as I was reading his book was a reading list, because he makes so many wonderful references to things that, you know, you read in high school or in college and you don't pick up anymore. Like he talks about Richard Wright. He talks about the wonderful essayist, James Baldwin. You know, he brings up a lot of people that we kind of set aside. He talks about W.E.B. Du Bois. And this is Du Bois's neighborhood. I know that I worked in a building that Du Bois worked in and lived in at one point when I was at the Institute of the Black World. So he says we really have to go back and read them because a lot of the problems that they identified, they're still there. The other thing that I feel that I needed and that I developed as I was reading the book was a timeline. Because you really have to recognize that it wasn't that long ago and that some of the things that he's talking about that sound historic happened yesterday or today, or they're going to happen tomorrow if you haven't had the experience yet. So the other question that, you know, in reading the book that we haven't talked about is the relationship between this particular history and prisons. And where are all of these wonderful black men? Did you read the AJC today? I brought it with me because I thought that you might say that you didn't. There's a wonderful article, Section B of the Metro section, males a distinct minority at historically black colleges and universities, written by the freshman president at Clark Atlanta University, Dr. Black, your stomping ground.
Yeah.
And he just raises the question, where are all of these young black men? Where are black men in America? Well, Houston, you want to share what you think of
Sure.
where they are?
Sure. I will begin by doing what I think sometimes we're I don't know, it's what it is, whether it's reluctance, whether it's envy, maybe we just don't know. But I mean, we have to prop people who do brilliant jobs with issues like incarceration. I mean, Michelle Alexander has written a book that everybody, right? I know you hear that all the time, I do. You know, everybody needs to read that and go, wow, there's only so much time, you know? But take my word for it. Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in America. It's stunning. I mean, it is so beautiful in style. It is so comprehensive in the issues that it takes up. It is so modest about, I'm not coming to you with a 12-point program. We're doing this. This is very hard. I understand there's a visionary component to it. But the argument makes itself from the title, The New Jim Crow. And what she talks about is that distinction that proceeds on the basis of skin color alone, and the decision that we will degrade that, we will create all kinds of legal fictions in order to keep that as our profitability. We will do this by any means necessary, and we start with the transatlantic trade, and we come down to the prison gulag of today, right? And that prison gulag has more incarcerated people than any other country on the globe, on the planet. And the prison population is increasing on a daily. And it is increasing across gender. Black women, pregnant black women, Hispanic men, black men. People who suffer incredibly from mental illness. There's no place that there are no middle stops. You give them a shot of Haldol and then you put them in prison. People who have a penny's worth of crack cocaine, you put them in for 15 to life. People on even domestic disputes, if you can run it up into abuse, you have them in prison. The other book is Colin Diane's book, D-A-Y-A-N, C-O-L-I-N, Colin Diane, who is our colleague at Vanderbilt University. And it's called The Law is a White Dog, on the unmaking, legal fictions and the unmaking of persons, legal fictions and the unmakings of person. So here's the deal, just in brief, right? Not that book, but where the two combined, right? Slaves were considered civilly dead. You know Orlando Patterson's book, right? Social Death, civilly dead. They had no rights that a white man, as Justice Denny put it, needed to respect. So no rights at all. So while civilly dead, however, the slave was a person in law. So it meant if you committed a crime, you suddenly were gifted with reason, consciousness, and intent. Okay? So the kind of gymnastics, imagine. And Colin is fabulous in some of these cases where, you know, people start talking about dogs and cattle and salt and pepper and common law and, you know, the best minds of their generation, you know, devoted to maintaining the carceral incapacitation of people of color. And then she begins talking about, right, as does the new Jim Crow, Michelle Alexander, about the criminalization that implies and how you can extend it into infinity. The drug war, okay, the drug war that devastated neighborhoods, but went directly into the pockets of Corrections Corporation of America and Wackenhut Corporation, who are international. It's not like they have a couple of prisons here and whatever, right? I mean, this is international, on the big board stock exchange places. And you know, it's fiendish, right? Just think about it. You move to the super max facility, like in Arizona, Florence, or Pelican Bay. Old theories of incarceration, starting in Philadelphia, Eastern State, Pennsylvania, or Albany, New York, working on a philosophical premise that if you isolated the prisoner, then he would have time to meditate upon his sins and he would be reborn, redempted. Very Pauline, okay? The man died, but the spirit was born, right? Both Alexander and Diane suggest that what the present day supermaxists have done is reverse that entirely, right? What you do is you kill the spirit, okay? And there's no rebirth, really. There's only the remainder, the detritus, the hulking, soon slimming down, for sure, but physical presence. You see no one. You touch no one. The bed is concrete. And in the wall, you sleep on a slab of concrete. Don't have matches. If you smoke and get the privilege of doing so, whatever, there's a hole in the wall, lights a cigarette. The sink is stainless steel and completely embedded in concrete. You just Google Florence, F-L-O-R-E-N-C-E, maximum security, and see the pride the state has, and 200,000 tons of concrete, and the number of locks and doors and so forth. And then there are units within that facility that are called administrative segregation units. All you have to do is be pointed to by a warden or guard and say, he belongs to a gang. You're out of general population, in isolation. 23 hours a day, okay? When you walk in what is called the dog yard, 20-foot high walls. You can barely see the sky. The murder of the spirit, that's such an institution, an institutionalization represents and sanctioned in every way, federally, state, private, entrepreneurially. Okay? 2.4 million people, as we sit here, are they. not in necessarily maximum, but the conditions that exist in maximum, they want to send down the line, continue, perpetuate those conditions. Now, I'll quickly round this off, because we're going to talk a little bit about how things have changed since this book was written. Michelle Alexander says that, and you will remember this, during his first year, Barack Obama delivered the Father's Day talk in Chicago in church, okay? And he was like, oh, you men need to be paying your child support. You need to, well, he didn't say you need to be, right? You know, he's very eloquent, you know, so, you know, he not defamed the brother's incredible oratorical skills, you know, but he said, you need to come home, right? You need to man up. You need to take responsibility. And many commentators were surprised that people were applauding. And they said, he got sustained applause. Michelle Alexander said, they shouldn't have been surprised if they knew anything about the black church, because they've been hearing sermons like that all their lives, right? I mean, we remember sermons like, you know, take responsibility that were gendered on Father's Day. And then Mother's Day, there was a different script, right? And people applauded. Next day, Michael Eric Dyson came out and said, well, why would he turn that kind of eye on black men on Father's Day and make it sort of sui generis unique, as though they were the ones who did this, you know? I mean, it's kind of a paean praise of, you know, good brothers. And Michelle Alexander then, that's what I mean about her writing and its access and the quality of mind. She says, well, what neither one of them talked about was where those black men were, and structurally and systemically how they got there, and the impossibility of their lives once they have died that civil death. They won't get jobs, okay? They won't be able to go into public housing. They won't be able to vote, okay? So the systemic analysis, this is what we don't get from our black public intellectuals, many of our black public intellectuals. So I'll stop here.
Well, you already asked the next question. Because the next question is, of course, his book was published in 2008. And those of you who know anything about publication, that means that a lot of it was written many years before then. Right, Danny? Yes, you write a book and it waits and then it hits the streets, probably, you know, like years later. And so things have changed. Everybody knows that. This is an election year. Things have changed. We have folks vying now for the opportunity to be president again of the United States. And if you were to write this book today, would your message be any different? The changing society, what would you say, Dr. Baker?
I think that it would be substantially different. I mean, I've sort of indicated that when I talk about each day, you know. When I told a colleague of mine, a white colleague of mine at Duke University, that every day before I left the building, because I was on the 3rd floor, I would stop at the window on the landing between the 3rd and the 2nd floor to see what was going on, you know. He said, oh, that's really funny. Oh, you're such a funny guy. I said, no, seriously. I said, this is in North Carolina. This is a white university, okay? This was built by Duke, okay? You know, you understand how he made his fortune, okay? I mean, right? We weren't involved, you know, at the administrative level, okay, right? So to share with you some of the changes that seem to me so they gotta seem incredible to everybody, right? I mean, how can you rip off a global economy to the tune of billions and billions and billions of dollars and do it in interactive fashion? Meaning, you know, it wasn't just like, you know, one guy who gave you the okie doke, you know, it wasn't metal, you know? I mean, it was like globally tied in financial institutions who send that tender within a nanosecond, you know? Yep, just sent off $1 billion, okay? Oh, here comes 2 billion, you know, right? And deal at that global level of transmission. How can you take down the world economy, plunge people into foreclosure, thousands and tens of thousands of people out of jobs, kill whole industries like the auto industries and so forth, and nobody go to jail? How does that happen? Explain that to me. All right? There are books out there that follow the money. I mean, Watergate, it was like, bang, we followed the money. These guys, you know, crooks, they need to, you know, they weren't censured in the way of maximum security. But nobody, okay, has gone to jail for this. And now everybody is sitting back waiting for I don't know what, you know? I saw Anthony Gagner this morning, and he looked qualitatively and quantitatively older than he did 2 years ago, you know, and he seemed to be kind of stammering. Well, growth. Yeah, well, you know, I think, you know, but, you know, there are a lot of indices of growth, okay? I mean, and the Fed has said they're going to keep interest low for the next 2 years. But then we could look at employment, you know, and, you know, Farad said, yeah, that's bad, right? Well, yeah, it is. It's bad, you know, because we ruined the economy. Apple, man, walking around asking about Apple. So what's the worst thing you can say about Apple? Talked to 100 people. He said, well, what did you hear? Their products are too expensive. Their products are too expensive? He said, yep, that's what one person said. And then another person said, because they employed so many people overseas, right? So you sit and you realize that Apple has, what, 100,000 people, maybe employees here, and 500,000 in China, okay? And, you know, we go like, well, why are there no jobs? Right? What's going on? And then you have apologists for that. They say, yes, but you get cheap products, right? You know, and they'd be much more expensive here. And so it's trade and commerce. I think, brother, I have a very different relationship to trade. Okay, the trade, the transatlantic trade. You know, the commerce to bring modernity. Okay, you know, in which I was not included as modern, right? Okay, as chattel personal. So this global financial crisis. Nobody's gone to jail. Nobody has a clue, right? Okay? But we know that the 1% on a daily gets richer. That's right. Okay? And that any sound address to two problems that are incredibly significant, I would think, for the little Africa and little Africans and a little African sensibility are Haiti and Katrina. How do you save out of that bizarre legal logic and the things that that Michelle Alexander and Colin Diane talk about, and many others? I mean, Angela Davis, the prison rights movement in the 70s, you know, but these are two contemporary live examples. How do you convert people who were living their lives under severe, strenuous conditions with man-made shoddy levees, and they're dying, and you are recodifying them as refugees? As refugees, okay? Out of New Orleans, the cradle of American multicultural civilization, then and now. I mean, a nexus of Haiti and France and, you know, the gens de couleur, right? Refugees, right? How do you look at any of the documentation of the NGOs in Haiti and those camps that are built there in the military that is blindsiding nightly rape and abuse of children, and say, well, it's because they were devil worshippers. It's that voodoo that did it, you know? Right? It stood up, right? I mean, that's an actual articulation in this country. So disasters like that don't get fixed. I heard a woman yesterday on the radio, and she said, "I'm not voting for Barack Obama." As a matter of fact, I've given up my registration as Democrat. I've registered Republican, and I'm going to vote for Mitt Romney. And the guy said, well, why? She said, Haiti. I've seen nothing from the Hope and Change president that gives me any hope that has changed anything. And she was like, I can't do worse. We agreed she could do worse, you know. But you know, I mean, the desperate measures of people who are looking at the ignominy of what has happened since this book was written. And I think one of the encouraging things that is not in this book is a group of young scholars who have come through some serious fire and some serious mentoring and training. We're producing some amazing books at this point and analyses. I think when we talk about Black public intellectuals, and these are men that I talk about, but anybody who does not salam, you know, and bow before the analyses of Melissa Harris Perry is just, I mean, your education has been wasted. I mean, she is an amazing analyst, right? Patricia Williams, Lonnie Guinier. I mean, these people have mentored folk. They are in the public sphere at this point and raising all kind of sand through the offices of their intellectual commitment, spiritual bonding with the little Africas of the world. I think I would now probably have to spend less time because of those younger scholars, and Sahara Lacewell doing sort of some of the bedrock establishment of the grounds on which I was going to argue. I mean, I think that there's a flow among younger scholars now that's quite vital. So
So now, if you haven't read the book, you will, right? Yeah, it is life-changing. I also, in addition to having my pen and paper to write down who I need to reread and who I need to read now that I haven't read, and my timeline, I also had to learn a lot of Latin, and I was very fortunate because he drops that in every now and then, and you're kind of like, okay, now how does that change the context of this? But I'm fortunate that I have a Jamaican who lives in my household, who, of course, because being educated under the British system, he had to learn Latin, so I just kind of like said, and what does this mean in this context? So it was very helpful to have him there. At this point, what we're going to do is allow you to ask questions of Dr. Baker. We do have a mic, and we do need to use the mic. I know everybody thinks, well, I don't need to use the mic, but I'd like for you to come up. We have about a half hour left, and ask questions. Gonna come up, Ms. Henderson?
Yes, and mine is not a question. I think I can speak loudly enough.
No.
Oh, I have to come up.
Because we are taping this, and we are actually showing this simultaneously via Ustream, so we want to make sure that we are on the mic. So if you have questions, please come up, and Jean has a question.
Mine's not a question, but I just had to say this. As a research librarian for 45 years, I am always impressed with the amount of research and the references to resources. It is outstanding, your presentation. Yes, I have worked in academia for 45 years, well, 35 years before coming here. And yes, it is an expectation, but you truly, truly, truly get it. And I want to just say to the audience that in order to have something of value for our people, we must do our homework. We must study the documents, the archives, the research, talk about the works of others. We're not the only ones that know something. And Dr. Baker, as fine and wonderful as he is, recognizes the fact that it is so important to read, and then pass it on. Look what the jewels of nuggets he's left with us. I want to thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That was very kind. Thank you.
Thank you. For those of you who don't know, Dr. Baker, despite or in addition to Betrayal, he has a body of work that is just absolutely fantastic. And I've been associated, or known him now for 40 plus years, and just about read everything that he's written. So I recommend you to definitely do your internet search or whatever it is you do to kind of take a look at the body of work that he has created for us. But my question is a real simple one. You began your presentation by mentioning Ted Jones.
Yes.
And I'd just like to ask you if you would give the audience a sense of who Ted Jones was and what his contribution has been to the literature.
Absolutely. Ted Jones, a poet, and it's Joans, Ted Jones. And Ted Jones, it's just one of the most amazing men and artists I've ever met. I think Ted may have been 8 or 10 years older than I was. And the first time people said we were going to have a poet and it was going to be Ted Jones, I had read some of Ted Jones' things, like that amazing poem about my T-shirt, sort of playing around with language and so forth. So I had a definition of a poet, with someone who jacket, tweed, maybe a sweater vest kind of thing, And Ted came in with the tam, and God knows what else it was he was wearing, But it was like the Punjab pants and a dashiki and beads and whatever, And right away he said, "Hey, Houston, how you doing?" I thought, he knows me, he didn't, but somebody had said, "That's Houston," And that was Ted's approach. "How you been, Houston? It's been a long time since we've seen each other," right? Well, Ted grew up with the Beats, okay, Kerouac, Ginsberg, and a whole group of people. And when he would start talking about his artistic world and the influence, he said, "We had some crazy people, Houston, in that group." There was this guy who said to us, he was going to write this book, okay, and it was going to be a guide for people to travel cheaply, and that he was going to make millions of dollars, and he was going to leave all of us behind on the sidewalk. And we just laughed at him. He said, "Houston, that book was called Europe on $5 a day," and he did leave us, okay? So Ted wrote poetry that was celebratory of the African diaspora, and he had a winning, an extraordinary personality that could establish camaraderie in a room in a minute, and he was completely self-deprecating, right? One of the smartest men I've ever met, but he could say, and I didn't know that, Houston. He said, everybody in the room knew that, but I did not know that, And that self-irony that was Ted's. A. Leroy Bibbs was reading with Ted Jones at Shakespeare and Company in Paris on the banks of the Seine, and we were living in Paris that year, and so I said, "I'm gonna go and see Ted," right? So I got there early because Ted just, everything filled up because Ted knew people all over the world, and he came in to the room to begin his reading late, about 40 minutes late, as a matter of fact. He wasn't late, but Hart was late. And he said, "Hey, how are y'all this evening? I'm sorry we're late getting started. It's really good to see everybody here," and he acknowledged a few people. And then he became aware that there was someone sitting behind him, right? And this was a young woman who was not of color, and she was sitting behind him. And he said, "Honey, what are you doing? You're behind me. All you can see is my butt, And she said, "Oh, Hart told me this was the best seat in the house." He said, "Honey, everybody knows Hart's an alcoholic." You cannot believe him. He's a decent boy, but he said, "Come on, somebody get out of that seat. Give this woman a seat up front," right? So Ted was capable of, the ironizing of the self. He was a poet of just prolific. If you Google him, you'll find multiple volumes. You'll find broadsides. He tied into the Black Arts movement here. As with many another genius of our little Africas, Ted had really tough times toward the end. I mean, where do you go if you're a nomadic traveling poet, as I've described Ted, when you need health care? Okay? You may have your global family, right? But the immediacy, like a nurse, when I went for a doctor's appointment recently, she's my cousin. My cousin, she is the looniest person in the world, okay? I always gotta go take care of her baby, take care of her when she's sick, and then she spends all her time telling me about her 1,282 friends on Facebook. so, you know, there's a price to be paid sometimes for the globality of friendship. But that was Ted. Thanks, Gene, for the question.
Sure.
Yes, sir.
How you doing, Professor? My name's Eric, and I just moved to Atlanta about 7 months ago from Memphis, Tennessee. And this is my first lecture I got involved in Atlanta, so just got a kind of question. I want to kind of pick your brain for a minute, real quickly. For me being a young man, of course, I did not really study about African American history or civil rights, or not a lot of history, other than I guess listening to my uncles or some guy off the street sitting on the porch drinking beer trying to tell me about African American history and stuff like that. So in listening to all that negative perception, I think there was a point in my life when I was younger, it turned me off from it.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I began to start studying more about the value of human life, or in search of absolute truth.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I was at a place, and right now I'm in a place of kind of confusion, whether to just embrace just like a set of race, because I want to learn about all types of different races. I just want to get into trying to debate about how much of faith, how much of science, and how much of history, trying to balance that as what, you know, as absolute truth, and trying to learn about humanity and stuff like that. Because like I say, well, after what I heard about, what people tell me about black, it kind of turned me off, and it kind of like they were trying to teach me the hatred about it.
Mm-hmm.
Although I have learned so many from different other races, they have taught me so many things. And so I guess now as a young man, and I'm trying to get myself implemented back to learning about the history of, and as me, I'm very reluctant to say, I don't want to say my history as this is just a racially motivated history.
Mm-hmm.
This is the only type of history that's learning, because I don't want to get so one-sided. I learn about one part of the history, and now my life has generated that, and my perception about being around other people begins to change. So
can I tie into what you're asking here now? I mean, because I think it's not a problem even, it's a dilemma. And the thing about the difference between a problem and a dilemma is dilemmas do not have solutions, right? I mean, so that we live within a dilemma, right, that we did not summon, create, or call for as a people, right? And it seems to me that the first law of Dr. King was realizing what he did know and what he didn't know, okay? I mean, there's the anecdote of just going to a meeting of welfare mothers, and he got up with that, you know, wonderful baritone voice and said, well, we are here tonight to discuss the egregious nature and problematic of welfare, particularly where our people are concerned. And I think there are many points, but I have three, at which point someone got up in the audience and she said, yes, and he said, yes. She said, Dr. King, have you ever been a welfare mother? And he said, no. She said, point well taken. So I'm gonna come up now, and he said, I'm sorry, there was hubris, it was such pride on my part. He sat down to listen. Okay? So that when you live with a dilemma that is not of your creation, you have to listen to a lot of people, including those on the porch, right? But then, because they're everywhere, okay? You know, of all, across races, cultures, whatever. But I think that you have gone on a very meaningful quest. And I think you should continue on that quest, because I say to students who come to my Black literature course, right? If you're not like Frederick Douglass, then you don't need to be here. And then, you know, they get all macho. They go, yeah, my middle name is Frederick Douglass. Oh, Frederick Douglass Johnson, you know? And I say, no, I mean, Douglass, who read Livy and Tacitus and Shakespeare, and Ovid, and came down through the Columbian arts, and Wordsworth and Coleridge, and if you're not like that, this is probably going to be very difficult for you.
But I'm going to add something to that, because Houston did bring copies of his book, and I'd like to give you, young man, to help you to build your library and autograph copies. And I'm going to suggest, because one of the pieces that we didn't talk about that Houston references in his book is a letter from a Birmingham jail. That if you haven't read that book, in talking about humanness and reconciliation and how we live our lives and what we've learned from each other, I am going to email the link to those of you who pre-registered, and we have your email address, to that letter, because I think that's a good starting point. It's an important piece for all of us.
Thank you. I'm Andre Holmes, a producer and journalist here. And I haven't read your book, but I wanted to find out if you offer any solutions to the workaround of being in this business of media. One of the problems that happens is I often would ask the question is it the issue that, is it a true betrayal that Black intellectuals have abandoned the era, or is there just not enough vehicles to get the Black intellectuals who haven't abandoned? Are they not being placed? And if there are solutions to address that. And the second question is, do you think that the Black satirists and comedians have kind of stepped up in a way to offer that analysis in other ways? If you look at The View, if you look at a lot of television, a lot of people giving commentary are comedians, and from that, they're the ones that are able to do that. So
Thanks, extraordinarily good, both of those questions. I have a colleague who is sort of in my age cohort. His name is Gunther Lentz, and he's emeritus now. He's retired from Humboldt University. But he read Betrayal recently, and he wrote to me, which is something Dr. Livingston and I were talking about just recently. And he said, well, I like the book. He said, but I have some problems with this. That was then when we were talking about the public sphere, and there's a different public sphere now. And I think that some of the people you talk about have done tremendous work in that sphere. And the works you chose by particularly West and Gates are among their less significant works. I had to ponder that. I really had to, it drew me up sharply. And in talking to my wife just last night about this, it occurred to me that the mode of presentation, which is why I kind of emphasize that today, of the work that gets sales in the hundreds of thousands, like Race Matters, is, it's got to be quick, it's got to be simple, it's got to be almost mindless at points, It's got to be filled with jargony stuff like, the love that is not love, but is loving. Really just read that. And audiences go like, I I'm like, what? For real? So I mean, the answer to Gunther would be, it's not what they said. And here we come back to Michelle Alexander and Colin Nahan. It's what they don't say. And I think it's a brilliant observation about the satirists and comedians and so forth. And if you haven't read it, it's a fantastic book. It's hard. It's when I say it's hard, I mean it's hard for me. Partially because of the field in which it situates itself and the vocabulary and so forth. But it's called In Search of the Black Fantastic, and it's by Richard Eaton, I-T-O-N. He's a Canadian scholar, an amazing guy. And he starts with Chappelle as the beginning of his larger political education. So yes, that. And to the first question about media, again, a book that is somewhat jargony, but I think theoretically is really important, is Jacques Derrida's Archive Fever. And what Derrida talks about, in a word, is anecdotal, it's really short-circuiting. What happens when Sigmund Freud's house is a public museum, and you're dealing suddenly with computers and the technology of, you know, cyberspace, and you don't have letters, so the archive changes and everything changes. And when you have a media environment like you're talking about now, I do think that there are, and have been, from Spike's independent, the indie film and Julie Dash, and that sort of Italian neo-realism that, you know, people took up with Killer of Sheep, Charles Burnett, and so forth. But there are only so many niches, and you're right about that, okay? Once you get the indie niche Negro, right, then you go like, well, you know, we're doing it. You know, we really got it going on. Sundance, the stuff that's being written this year, you know, the Sony Classics has a completely different relationship to that than they did 7 years ago, for example. The expectations of Sundance that you'll get $10 million for an indie film. So this, again, is that sort of constant changing thing. And we don't have, I think this is fair to say, as a people, okay, the venture capital, all right, that the more culturally and economically privileged folk have, so you don't have as many venues to turn to. And foundation giving is, you know, that's right. I mean, after 9/11, okay, you know, the foundations and so forth were seriously crippled. But thank you for the
I'm almost overwhelmed, really. First, just to be in your presence, I really appreciate you, and your analysis, I think, is, of course, razor sharp. As a writer, I've been very concerned with a dilemma that I feel like is taking over the African-American literary tradition, and that is what seems to be the trading out of contemporary literary fiction for this street urban lit. The means by which, even as a writer, you know, my publisher even asked me very kindly, I guess I should say, if I could do a little bit of that urban lit to at least kind of advance it. You know, for every, I think she said, for every one literary novel sold, they sell 20 urban lit novels. And I just wanted to know, what's your take on the infusion of this new genre into what we understand as an African-American literary tradition?
I would say, you know, in the spirit of a kind of ecumenicalism and cosmopolitanism and looking at the demographics, it's the census figures. I think that people who are more privileged and in different standing can take a lot more junk than we can. You know what I mean? This is a bad dichotomy, but you know what I mean? The urban fiction is not even up to that I've looked at, the Harlequin romance standard, right? So I guess like with my grandfather, and you know, would tell me Elvis Presley would rock my mind, you know? And he probably did, and I had to recover it. So, you know, every new phenomenon that comes on gets like hip hop, rap, you know? Oh, this is the death of our, you know, people, we're gone now, you know? All we're gonna see is people with their pants pulled down, calling people out of their name, you know, in every black community. Well, you know, the detritus, that wheat chaff thing occurs. The major consideration and the final answer for now, I mean, because we'll be in discussion a long time, is I don't mind Barnes & Noble putting up the shelves. It's a consumer market. Who am I to determine what people like to read? You know, I mean, it may be sorrow, it may be grief, it may be this. I'd rather have them reading, okay, than watching Bravo all the time. You know, and I watch Bravo. I do, I watch Bravo. And I read everything. I mean, I love a supermarket line, you know? Right? I say, wait a minute, man, you can put my Globe in, okay? Don't put it in with the meat, okay? Seriously, if you don't read everything, you don't know what's going on. So I don't mind that, but when you put it up as Afro-American literature, okay, and there's nothing. There's no, you know, Daniel Black. There's no Richard Wright. There's no Maya Angelou. There's nothing. It's just all this stuff. Zayn and Jade and whoever, you know, these folks are. And that is the categorization that's just like saying, you know, well, we're going to take you over to the Negro exhibit. Okay, you know, that's what we show you. This is what they're thinking. This is what they're writing. Okay, this is the way they live their lives. They're passionate as a people. Okay, and you say, well, do you have Ralph Ellison? You know, and the sales clerk will have to go to the computer and find Ralph Ellison. Now, how do you spell that? You know, it's 2 L's. Okay, right? So that's mine.
Thank you so much for your comments. I would actually like to hear you expound more upon that notion of dangerousness, this precipice that you alluded to earlier, because I feel it and I understand it more and more. And I think about it limiting the rules of engagement for potential Black intellectuals and people who are coming up, because there are consequences to the activity of being called a race woman or race man.
Yes, yes. One of the things that does is to segue once again into this notion of post-Blackness, right? So I'm talking about, yes, Touré's book, okay? But I'm talking about a whole class of folk, okay? So imagine with me for a moment, really quickly, the author, you can give him any name you want, of the book called Post-Jewishness. Okay, I guarantee you that's not going to be a bestseller. Okay, right? I mean, you know, Benign Breath is going to be there, bang. You know, at the publisher, they're going to buy up all the copies, you know, and they're going to burn that book right away, you know. I mean, it's gone, you know, right? Even the Iranians won't read that book. They're going to know somebody done lost his mind. Okay? So this notion of post-Blackness, okay? But I mean, let's say, okay, we have to have flexible minds. We're going to play around, right, with that. You know, actually I've reviewed it, but I mean, we're going to play around with it, okay? And let's see what's going on. And they say, well, we're not saying post-racial. Race is operative everywhere, okay? But one of the commentators, who is a law professor, says, well, yes, race is present, and I was traumatized by it for a long time. I even went into therapy, okay? But then I learned to wear my trauma. And I'm like, excuse me? That's where Bravo stands in good stead, right? You know, we got the runway of trauma, okay? You know, she's wearing her trauma, you know, and you go like post-traumatic slave syndrome, you know? I mean, it's that ridiculous language, you know, that is seductive in a way. And then you say, well, what's the scholarly apparatus here? All right, and Touré says, I interviewed 102 prominent Black people. Okay, I nailed that baby down. Okay, indisputable, you know, I've done my homework, right? And you go, well, Touré, there are 40 million Black people. You know, he goes, I know, but this 102 are prominent Black folks. Did you hear me? I said prominent Black folks, okay? I mean, they're sort of standing on top of the world, right? They got an overview of it, and they've decided there is such a thing as post-Blackness, and they are it, right? So this is an extreme, dangerous form of elitism, okay? Particularly when it gets financed, and it does get financed, trust me, okay? And so you've got, and the young man on the left, you know, I know he's, you know, got a book, and I'm going to hear from him and so forth. But I mean, that search that you need to engage in is difficult, because when you get students coming in the classroom, you know, they can be, these days, right, of any odd mixture, right? I mean, you can have Serbo-Croatian, Indo-European, Japanese, Jamaican students sitting on the front row, you know, and you go, hey, she put me in the mind of my cousin, you know, and she goes like, I am not, you know, any definitive kind of thing, right? So you know that you have students coming in, but then you also have, okay, James Jefferson and Bonnie Jackson, okay, coming in the classroom. And the problem comes about when those two begin to say, because I'm here among this odd mixture and these white folks who have, white people, sorry, white people, you know, who have all kinds of privilege, I'm gonna act like them, you know, and they usually say act. I'm gonna act like them, right? You know, and you go, baby, you can't act like them, okay? You don't have any money. I read your first paper. I did your charitable thing by giving you a D. Okay? Seriously, I know you got the clothes, the skinny jeans and the furry boots and everything, but you don't look right in it, you know? Not here, not now, you know? You need something else to go with it. You need cultural capital, okay? You need to work. You need to go to Google quick, okay? Right? I'll even accept Wikipedia for your paper. You know what I mean? And they don't speak to you. You know? I mean, what kind of thing is that? You going across campus and they looking right at you. You know, saying, "And I'm fine, right? You know, I know you're looking at me. You know, and you go like, hello." You go, what is that about? Okay? I walk around campus with my head down. I do, you know. I just can't stand it. It's too painful. It really is, you know, to see this, you know, to show up at, and my wife was discussing this with Dr. Collette and others earlier, you know, to get them to show up to geniuses at the Black Cultural Center, you gotta have a buffet. Wings and Jamaican patty, you know, 3 kinds of beverages, lemonade, whatever, you know, and they line up for it and they pound the plates, you know, and then the program goes on, okay, and midway in the talk, you know, they got the books, the coats, and they're gone, right? And if you don't have lunch, you know, you don't have an audience, you know? And that to me is just, that's tragic. I mean, the tuition is $40,000 a year, you know, and you get a scholarship. Now I have hardworking students. I have students and graduate students and young folks who I've mentored and I'm proud death of, and they're working like crazy and so forth. But the race man or race woman or, you know, saying this is what you know, are required, responsible to at least acknowledge and do something about. Very hard sell these days. It's tragic.
Dr. Baker. I wanted to, first of all, say thank you on behalf of the Little Africa community, of course, like everyone else, but specifically from North Santee community in Georgetown, South Carolina.
Oh,
yes, definitely.
Nice.
But I wanted to raise a question about, two-part, real quick, about Dr. King,
yes,
and then about cultural capital.
Okay.
And, you know, sort of that idea. And I was reading your second chapter on Dr. King, and I was thinking about the way that you couched Dr. King's letter from a Birmingham jail, not just in terms of civil disobedience, but also in terms of Plato's Apologia.
yes.
And one thing that I've been challenging my students to do is to think about what are the actual homegrown sources of Dr. King's philosophy.
Nice.
So I'm really thinking about what do you see as sort of that cultural capital? I would say even philosophical, intellectual capital from Little Africa that will allow us to really, to address this dilemma that you talked about in this country.
Okay.
And because, like I said, it's not just race,
Right.
not just class, but and a cultural piece there
Right.
also.
Oh, sure. Oh, sure. Yeah, I think one of the things that I am, for strategic reasons, looking at, questioning now is the way that I have used culture in the past, right? I mean, it became a grand unifier for we who work with the Black aesthetic and the Black arts movement, and we assumed that there was an African derived and that you could read certain authors, you could listen to certain music, you could dance in certain ways, you could, you know, your cadences, your syntax, so forth, and you would say, well, this is authentic and genuinely Black culture, Black culture. And then somebody would come along and say, but what about Guadeloupe? You know, and you'd have to say, well, I don't speak French. So I don't know if that's black culture because I can't read French, you know? And so I would say, well, what about the Lusophone Caribbean? And you go like, well, I don't speak Portuguese either, so I don't know about that. And you get slapped upside your head, as it were. You know, Wale Soyinka is in charge of the conference that is going to deal with Italian, Somali, Ethiopian, Nigerian. I'm going like, Lord, I'm just getting on to the Francophone, okay? So I mean, to use the signifier black, right, and think that you have a handle on culture because you've read Sekou Touré and Amiri Baraka, okay, and been to some meetings, okay, you know, and I have my stamp still on my hand, from the authentic black culture era. So culture is such an elusive term, and when people use it, they often use it in ways that are very destructive and dangerous. I mean, like the Japanese culture, right? Greek culture, what does that even mean, right? I mean, when one knows that the favorite land of the Greek gods was Ethiopia, right? And what was Ethiopia then? I have a person whose committee I'm sitting on now, his name is Arthur Carter, one of the smartest people I know. He's working on diaspora. But he's working on diaspora in this double context. African diaspora concerns, specifically a trilogy of Haiti, New Orleans, Africa, Jean Nicola, the things I was talking about, but in the context of New Testament Christianity, specifically Acts 1, whatever, and this young man reads Greek, Latin, right, and is working it out, right, in terms of the dispersion, bringing glissant, le mime, et les divers into this. So any notion, right, that one could have, that you have the culture now. And so, I mean, for King, I would say that the operative resource bank was plenitudinous, right? And that you can absorb that which is foreign, non-your culture, into your sense of what is yours, right? And as some people would say, vernacularly, you can blacken, right? Which is positive, right? For purposes of communal survival and movement. Anything, I mean, no one should be a stranger. You shouldn't shy away from, it seems to me, the wisdom of the present or of the age.
Last question.
Afternoon, Doctor. I'm so elated to be here and so glad I got on the email list. One of the thousands. But I am so enlightened by your presentation tonight and looking at that. When I looked at the title of that book, Betrayal, because I believe that so much as a minister and a writer myself. And how much of that betrayal do you think, or do you is there a percentage that you feel they are knowledgeable, some of these leaders are knowledgeable about their betraying their race or their people, and how many of those are not aware because of so many other things that are thrown in their way so they can't focus?
That's a good question. I mean, I think that there was a conscious move on the part of certain members of the group or cadre I talk about who realized where the money was going and made a conscious decision to shift from an orientation that might have been called black cultural nationalism, right, to the center. And I think they were very self-conscious. I mean, one of them said to me, well, yeah, they may be neoconservative, but they got a lot of money, okay? And so I think that there is that consciousness. And then I think we go back to this question of education and who one brings into one's life, or before whom one says, I stand here, you know, in ignorance, which I do all the time, people, and I need to learn from you. Okay, so help me. And I think some of that spirit of putting oneself before people in that way has been sorely diminished and is going lower and lower as people don't seem to think it's important to be like you, a minister. Okay, we do have to minister to the youth. We do have to minister to those behind bars. We do have to minister to those who are members of our professional organization. And we can't be afraid. Fear is so colossal these days, right? I mean, fear of being called racist. I go like, are you serious? You know, I would be afraid of being called a racist. But yeah, well, brother, I mean, you know, you're capitalizing that black in there, but you're not capitalizing. And I'm like, you can't be back there, that retarded. You know, I mean, to anybody, I mean, the national supposed conversation that's going on with Newt Gingrich, the media, just like with Occupy Wall Street, for 3 weeks, there was nothing on the shows. Okay, you didn't see Candy Crowley or Farad or anybody. You know, you didn't see Brian Williams even talking about it. And then when they began talking about it, they talked about it like it was something that's going to go away. It's not going to go away. It's not, right? And so when you have that sort of, you know, well, we're not going to say that Newt Gingrich is a dyed-in-the-wool in his rhetoric racist. And it's disgusting. And it's shameful. Where are black public intellectuals, right? With a manifesto against this kind of language in the debate, right? Okay? So I think that the diminution of critique is one of the things that we have to look to. And I know you do that with your congregation. Thank you for being here.
Well, I want to thank Dr. Baker for being here, and I want to thank all of you for being here for this conversation. This is an important period in all of our lives. I don't know how I can get up and just, you know, not say to you how serious this time is in our world. We talk about, we've had many conversations today. We've talked about the community. We've talked about people who are incarcerated. We've talked about children. We've talked about healthcare or the lack thereof. And so, you know, to come together and to begin this conversation means that everybody's now been indicted. Everybody's got work to do. We can't just hear this, experience this, and not go out and take the next step of changing the world. Every day, I tell people, they laugh at me, I always think about Pinky and the Brain. That cartoon, if you don't remember it, every day I go down there and I think about how am I going to take over the world. But I have to change myself first, you know, I have to work on me in order to do that well. But every day, that's my mission. I get up and I'm out there. There are a lot of wonderful things going on out there in the community that I want to share with you. I want you to go to Chastain Art Center. There's an exhibit up. Name of it, Beatrice? Question Bridge, about black men. It's a worldwide exhibit. You can go online and look up Question Bridge. They have, their curriculum is up for educators, all kinds of things about the exhibit. Go out and see it and check it out. We're getting to that period of the year where Black History Month will be going on, so, you know, stay tuned, go out and check out things. We have Calvin Ramsey here, his book, and in the Green Book. It's going to be at the Center for Puppetry Art, starting the 7th of February. So yeah, of course, I would say something, I would recognize you, and congratulations on all the awards that you've received for that important work. Children 9 and above, this is a good thing. You want to do something on a Sunday, make sure that that happens. Did Dr. Black leave? I think I saw him go out. His book was just nominated for an award, and I think he's going to win it. Somebody, who had his book? Oh, I bet he's out. He's out talking to your wife. Is she out there with him? That's what, she's trying to get him to autograph that book. Huh? What's the name of the book?
Perfect Peace.
The Perfect Peace.
Perfect Peace.
That's
The
not the
Perfect
main.
Peace. It was nominated, it was in the paper oh, there he is. I'm just talking about you and your book. And you snuck out, and I told them that he was with you. I knew that. You were out there getting your book autographed, and I was congratulating you on its being nominated. Of course, we know this. Dr. Baker will autograph, if you have copies of the book, he will autograph them. Did anybody join the festival today? Nobody joined the festival?
You didn't ask me a book, I'll join.
I got a book for you if you join.
Okay.
All right, all right.
Join too.
And I asked.
I joined too.
You know, wait a minute, I'm gonna give it to the volunteers and let them make sure that that happens. But those of you who did bring copies of your book, Dr. Baker will autograph them today. And I will see you on the 19th of February for Halima Taha's talk. I appreciate your coming, and I definitely appreciate your staying. Thank you so much.